for some of you, that may have been the first time you heard that song. I put the link to the song in the chat there if you want to listen to it again later. But I just want a couple questions before we get into the presentation. And anybody just throw your hands up or throw an answer down in the chat. But why did we watch that? What do you think my aim was, my point? Oh, yeah, Crystal.
I think to kind of understand the perspective or look through the eyes of a man of kind of what he's feeling, that he can't verbalize.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And as women who are so used to expressing our thoughts and our emotions, whether people want to hear them or not, I think maybe growing in an appreciation for how hard it might be for them, even if it's only what they perceive their rights are or aren't to express themselves, or how they perceive a person may or may not be interested. We need to get that as people who might be ministering to them.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And look, my wife and I have been married 24 years. We have a very good relationship. And when I played that video for her, she teared up and said, "Oh my gosh, is that how you feel?" I said, "Sometimes." The idea that men don't talk about their feelings because we all think we're Clint Eastwood or Charles Bronson. Wow, I'm really dating myself, aren't I? But macho or whatever. That's not really it. It's a lot of what is expressed in the lyrics of that song, and it's what we deal with as healing providers. With not only getting men to show up, but getting men to talk. I speak all over the country. I have for years now, and I've spoken to thousands of people at this point. Every event I've ever done, at least one man walks up to me and he kind of looks around, and he says, "Hey, I've never told anybody this, but when I was in high school, when I was in college, when whatever, my girlfriend, my significant other had an abortion." And most of the men, when I engage them, they say, "Oh, well, that was in the past. Ain't no big deal." Well, you can't do anything about it now. The conditioning that what I think and feel doesn't matter keeps men from getting the healing they need, and not just from abortion, other kinds of pregnancy loss, right, or childhood traumas, or abandonment, abuse, whatever. So I was, excuse me, I had to go out of town to do a wedding last week, to officiate a wedding, and I was talking to one of the family members who was there. Never met this cat before in my life, and he said, "What do you do?" And I told him, about the books I write and the work I do with support after abortion. And this man in his late 60s shared his story for the first time ever, in his words. And then I started talking to him about healing opportunities and what that might look like. And he said, "Nah, 45 years ago, I'm good." So I wanted to play that song, and thank you all for indulging me and engaging for a minute, because I think it's important. Oh, wait, Kevin, you have something you want to share, ask, say?
Yeah, so your question was, why do you think that you showed that video? And I think it's an excellent video to lead men into a conversation, because of the transparency that he's singing about will allow the conversation to become more transparent. Thanks for letting me share.
I appreciate that, Kevin. So tell me if I'm right here, right? Kind of what I'm getting from you is that if a man sees another man share openly, honestly, vulnerably, then that'll almost give him permission to do the same. Is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah, and I'll give an example of this. I work in Christ-centered 12-step also. And so I had the opportunity to share my Celebrate Recovery testimony in a group of about 120 people last night. maybe half of them were men. And I can tell you that in the small group discussions afterwards, because I mentioned that I'd sought healing and received healing from 3 abortions in my past, that it opened up all kinds of small group conversation. So thanks for letting me share that.
Thank you for sharing that, Kevin. I'm sorry for your loss, and I can relate. I was a Celebrate Recovery leader for years in the 2010s and experienced what you just said. So there's something to that. So now, what I kind of want to get into and what I really want to drill down on today, excuse me, traveling. I've got this catch in my throat now. Anyway, the white paper that Support After Abortion commissioned, I don't, Lori, you got a whiteboard up here. That was interesting. Anyway, excuse me. Support After Abortion commissioned a study on the impact of abortion in men. And last April, we released a white paper. And I want to talk about some of the key findings in that white paper with the balance of our time today. And then we'll have time for questions at the end. And again, if you have questions or thoughts or whatever, just drop them in the chat. One of our team members, Ivy, is monitoring the chat. I'm a guy. I'm not multitasking, so I can't do both. So let's jump right into this. Now, we know women are hurting after abortion, right? There's been a lot more studies done about the impact of abortion on women than there have been men. But we know men are hurting too. And our study that we're going to talk about today, even though we have one on women and medication abortion, this deals specifically with men. But since 01 to 2021, there have been over 20 million abortions, or 20 million people have experienced abortion. So by our stats, which we'll get into in a minute, but that leaves 16 million or 82% of men and women in this country in the last 20 years who have experienced abortion loss and have no idea where to go for healing. Now, since we're all healing providers on here, that should be a startling statistic. Let's talk about the study a little bit. Support After Abortion commissioned it. It was conducted by Shepherd Research, which is out of Oklahoma City. Did a random sampling across the nation. 1,000 men we found that were over 18 across the U.S., 100 men who met the criteria, i.e. they had personally experienced an abortion and responded. So some of the key findings: 1 in 5 men will experience abortion loss in this country by the time they're 45. That number may be low. We know almost 50% of abortions are repeat abortions, right? But so 1 in 4 women we know will experience abortion loss by 45. But for men, we found 1 in 5. But I think if you really think about, I mean, how many men didn't even know that the female was pregnant, had the abortion, all those kind of things. So we also know that men suffer disenfranchised grief. We'll talk about that in a little bit, because the conversation around abortion has been largely around women. Most men, as I mentioned a moment ago, said they either sought help or could have benefited from help, 83%. But only 18% said they knew where to go for help. And we're going to talk about what we found in the study, which is quite a lack in healing resources available for men. So let's talk about the 20%, right? The 1 in 5 who experience abortion loss. Well, 45% of these guys said they had no voice or choice in the decision. 57% said that they did not make the decision to abort. And then from another study from Guttmacher, 57%, ironically same number, said that they would not have chosen to terminate the pregnancy. So there's a lot of noise in the wind out there, as my father used to say, about what role men play in abortion. And although there are some that fit every category, our study found that almost 50% said they didn't have a voice at all. and 57% said they would not have chosen abortion. Now, in the time since this white paper came out, I've had a lot of people say to me, oh, well, you just interviewed a bunch of pro-life evangelicals. I mean, I've literally had that quote dropped on me. So I want to share this number with you guys. This is important. 51% of the men in our study self-identified as pro-choice, only 49% pro-life. So whether they thought abortion should be legal or not, none of that mattered when it came down to the 71% of the men in our study who reported an adverse change after the abortion experience. And when guys call our line and they want a secular conversation, they come to me. So I've heard this from guy after guy after guy. Look, I was pro-choice, but fill in the blank, right? And then a combination, 83% either looked for help or said they could have benefited from help. So you got 71% of men hurting and 83% saying, I tried to find help or I could have really used some help. Here's a problem with that help, a disconnect. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later. Now, we talked about this, the 83% that want help. And we talked about the 71% that had pain. And we talked about the 18% who said they knew where to go, which means the rest of them didn't, right? But here's a problem. Only 7% of the men in our study said that they would go to a member of the clergy for help. 7. Only 40% said that they would prefer some kind of religious approach to their healing. And over half, 53% of the men in our study said that they seldom or never attend church. Okay. So contrast that with the estimated 95% of healing programs that are out there for men right now are religious forward. It's about context, right? I'm a Christian. It's not about denying God, but it's about context. If you hang a shingle out on your church that says men's abortion healing Thursday night at 7, and the guy 2 blocks away fits the majority of these categories here on your screen, you're not reaching. And that's important information. And I want to let that sit for a minute because we're going to talk about what options-based healing looks like shortly. But we talk about the role of men in decisions, and this kind of ties into the role of men in healing as well. You got to look at this from Dr. Gwynn from USC. And he says, and I think very succinctly, men have been minimized, if not completely overlooked in the abortion conversation. That's one of the biggest problems. It really kind of ties into that song, doesn't it? The feeling that what you're feeling doesn't really matter and that you don't have a voice. But I would argue that it's worse in the abortion world. Remember, 71% reported adverse changes. So let's come back to that for a minute. What are those adverse changes? Depression, guilt, regret, anxiety, anger, substance abuse. You throw any number of those together, and that's a concoction that's fairly dangerous to the man and to the people around him. Cleveland Clinic, when we talk about men's grief and pain, they said that grief can affect every aspect of your being, your mind, body, and spirit. So men feel those adverse changes we just talked about. If they're not healed, if they don't find some reconciliation with those, then it absolutely affects every aspect of your life. And when I talk a little bit about my experience with abortion loss and recovery in a little bit, we'll see an illustration of that and how that's true. One of our workshop attendees said the quote at the bottom, just talking about men's abortions and knowing that I'm not the only one and that there is hope for healing is priceless. Now think about that. He's not looking for a magic pill. Just talking about it and knowing that healing is even an option, he said, is priceless. I 100% agree. So emotional validation. I told you we were going to come back to this. When the white paper came out, I had the opportunity and privilege to have op-eds published in national level publications. Washington Examiner, Newsweek, did an interview with Fox News. And I thought this was terrific from an awareness standpoint, right? I wasn't talking about politics or anything else. I was just talking about some men hurt and healing's an option. That was kind of the thing, right? Here are some of the comments I got under those publications. Men need to stay out of it. Quit whining and man up. Men can shut their mouths. Their hurt feelings are not a real consideration here. We should be concerned about a man's feelings? How ironic, LOL. And the one that has stuck with me out of the thousands of comments, and at a point, I'll be honest with y'all, I quit reading them. I'm like, okay, but it was this. I hope you have a daughter. And if you do, I hope she's raped. Then we'll see what you think about abortion. We talk about it, emotional invalidation. These are just what the 4 on the screen and the one. That's just 5 comments, folks. Now, they didn't impact me like they might a guy say who's been holding this secret. Like one of the guys that I said walked up to me, or that walked up to Kevin when he shared his testimony. Guys that are unsure if they're even allowed to say anything about how they feel about it. And they read these kind of comments. What's that going to do to them? I would say it would encourage them to be quiet. So some of the challenges to men's healing and to getting men to healing, first of all, lack of awareness. A year and a half ago, I challenged our team to start booking me at conferences that were not explicitly pro-life. I'll be honest, I tried to get into some pro-choice conferences and they declined my admittance. And so last year we spoke at a lot of different places, men's conferences that again weren't expressly pro-life. Everywhere I went, people said the same thing. You know, I never thought about the man. I never thought about the man in the abortion experience. That's interesting. So I appreciate their honesty, but the lack of awareness is still a thing. And I've watched that change since I entered healing, thank goodness. In the last 6 months, 8 months, I've seen an incredible number of pregnancy centers reach out to me and say, hey, we got a new guy on staff, or we got a new guy volunteering. Help us help him. Part of the reason Men's Healing Matters was born. There's also a lack of abortion healing resources for men by men. Y'all remember earlier I mentioned I've been married for 24 years. Well, one thing I've learned is that men and women don't quite think alike all the time. I'm just saying. And so healing resources that are written by men and for men are in pretty short supply, and we need more of them. We need more of them now. And then lack of options for the type of healing men prefer. And again, we talked about that a minute ago. We're going to get a little deeper into it here in a few. And I want to talk about what abortion healing is, and permit me to use a bit of a story to illustrate this. Last night I made supper. It was way too cold in central Indiana to grill. So I took some steaks that were on sale at the grocery store and put butter on them and pepper and salt and cooked them in the iron skillet. And then I took some olive oil and some black pepper and did up some potatoes and some Brussels sprouts and roasted them. My youngest son was here and his girlfriend was here for dinner, and they were asking me what I did. Now I know what they were expecting. This is how this ties into healing. They probably were expecting some elaborate Food Channel thing, right? I suppose I could have overcomplicated it, but I didn't. I made what they thought was incredible food, and it was very simple. I think we do the same thing with healing. We kind of overcomplicate it. It's really simple. Splather some butter on it and throw it on a hot skillet, right? Abortion healing, and so all that to say, it's similar to other losses and traumas, and we understand how that works. But it's about sharing stories. It's about helping men find a healthy way to work through emotions, about grieving the loss or losses, whatever those may be. And then ultimately getting to a place where you find freedom for making the decisions that you made out of fear and based on the trauma you had. And I'll share a little bit about my story here in a bit and how that kind of played out for me in the 21 years between the first abortion loss and healing, which is a long time. The other thing to be mindful of, folks, is that healing isn't a one and done proposition. There are layers of healing. We have a booklet at Support After Abortion called Keys to Hope and Healing. And some of you use it. I know some of you have, some of you have heard of it, but you haven't used it, whatever the case may be. This book leads men, and we have a women's version too, through a 6-week group study for abortion healing. It's a very entry-level product by design. And that is one layer. Somebody that maybe doesn't have any recovery at all, or doesn't really fully understand the terms and ideas and concepts of recovery. But when they finish that 6-week study, in every group I've ever facilitated, not once have I said, all right, you graduated, you're healed, go on with life. And how it works. We've taken a few groups from that through a book I wrote called Almost Daddy, A Men's Guide to Healing After Abortion, which is a 15-week study based on the 12 steps. Any of you familiar with the 12 steps understand that in and of itself is a bit of a deeper dive, right? And Support After Abortion will have come out. You guys are probably mostly familiar with Unraveled Roots. We have a men's version coming out here in another month or two. Again, so now in those layers of healing, now we're going to go back and look at those childhood issues, childhood traumas, abandonment, abuse, codependency, those kind of things. So when we talk about layers of healing, we start here and we keep moving. And the last thing is meet people where they are. And Father Sean Moynihan, who's one of our board members, said this quote in a webinar, and I just love it. He said, "We can't always lead with Jesus or prayer. We need to lead with love. Our role today is to help them find hope, healing, and peace at this stage of their journey." Ask you a question, kind of rhetorical, but think about it. If you're working in a homeless ministry, which I used to, and say you're out passing out box lunches and bottles of water to homeless folks, and you walk up to a guy. Now, I'm going to give you 2 scenarios. You tell me in the chat if you'd like, which one is more Christ-like, shall we say? First scenario, I walk up with the box lunch and the water, and I say, "Hey man, are you hungry?" And he says, "Yeah, I'm hungry." And I say, "Cool, do you want this?" And I hand it out and I go, "Wait a minute. Have you accepted Christ? Okay, here, do you want it? No, tell me you're a sinner. Come on. If you don't tell me you're a sinner, you can't have the lunch." Okay. That's one option. Option 2, I walk up. I say, "Hey brother, how are you? Are you hungry?" And he says, "Yeah, I'm hungry." And I say, May I sit down with you?" And I sit down. "What's your name?" "My name's Bob." "Well, here, Bob, here's some lunch. Tell me about yourself. How'd you get here? How'd you end up here today?" Or whatever the conversation goes, right? And I talk to him and I learn about who he is. And when he thanks me, I give credit where credit's due, right? I'm not doing this. I'm merely trying to be the hands and feet of God. To me, it's pretty clear. And it's what Father Sean's talking about. We meet people where they're at and we help them find a path to healing. What you'll find with a lot of men is that when you scrape, the first thing that you're going to run into with a lot of men is anger. Behind that anger is fear. Behind that fear is the real, right? Whatever's actually happening. If you come up with no context for this guy and tell him, "Hey, you have to enter into this healing thing the way I think you should," you're going to lose him. We'll talk about this in a few months, a little teaser here, but a lot of men have father wounds, and some of those father wounds stem from the church. I don't mean the church in the capital, but whatever. church. So something to think about. We talk about meeting people where they are. I want to go back into these stats. 83% of men want help, but only 40% want a religious approach. 77% of men, and I think very interestingly, want anonymity. And then almost half prefer a licensed clinician. But so guys want to be anonymous. A lot of that's about the shame and guilt surrounding abortion. And we look at this, what I call the healing wheel. But I would encourage you as a provider to pick a couple different options, maybe even ones that seem like they're diametrically opposed, even though they're really not. For example, Keys to Open Healing, we have a religious version and a secular version. They're different books. Now I can tell you, the last Keys to Hope and Healing group I facilitated, which was secular, because that's what the men who joined it chose, asked for. It was secular. Without any prompting from me, by the end of the last session, they all instigated and committed praying together and for one another. But it's about options. Talk about options. We need programs for different levels of healing. We kind of talked about that a minute ago. And there's levels beyond anything we've produced as an organization, anything I've written or anybody. There's a time when a guy's going to need to go with a professional therapist at some point if he digs deep enough. We need programs with different modalities, right? That's the options wheel we were talking about. A weekend retreat, in person, virtual. And I'll tell you something, if I'm being honest, I was against virtual 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I didn't want to do it. My whole life in recovery has been in-person meetings, and I thought that's the only way to do it. What I found is that men that I've facilitated virtual groups for have been actually more open. Why? Well, I mean, look where I'm sitting. I'm sitting in my home office. I got my books back there, right over there hanging on the walls, my guitar. This is my space. And so I feel comfortable and I feel safe. And we need more clinical, secular, and anonymous options. We need more clinicians trained. Now, a little bit about my story. When I was 18, my girlfriend and I got pregnant, and her mom decided she was going to have an abortion, and I protested, but I was told this is what was going to happen. And so, like any kid of the 80s, I guess, with all the programming and so forth, I went with them. And I went inside. I was inside for about 8 seconds, and then I was asked to wait outside. And so I sat on the steps. Interestingly, 2 summers ago, through a conversation with somebody that is a director of a pregnancy center group in Southern Indiana, I found out where that clinic was, and I went and sat on those steps. And it's no longer an abortion clinic, but I put my hands on the building and I prayed for not only my child but all the children that were lost there. But when my girlfriend came out, something was different. I could see it in her and in me, even though everybody kept telling me it wasn't a big deal and not a real body person and blah blah blah. It sent me down a road, folks. Let's put it this way: that was at the end of my senior year. My intent was to go to college. I had the opportunity to try out as a walk-on at the college I was going to go to, their soccer team. I had already been to journalism camp. I know that's how cool I am. Journalism camp the summer before. I was planning on studying journal. I had all these plans. What happened was I didn't go to college. I couldn't hold a job, couldn't hold a thought. I started becoming very angry, and never really been an angry person, but I started engaging in, I call it now adrenaline junkie behaviors. Back then, cliff diving. I bought a motorcycle. How fast can I go? when I look back, it was just this swirling vat of confusion and anxiety and depression set in. And here's the thing, gang, I didn't have a name for any of it. I moved around the country. I did all kinds of different stuff. I eventually went to college, and then I flunked out because it turns out if you don't go to class, you flunk. And then at 22, I had taken a construction job in Western Nebraska. Long story, but I did. And I had dated someone briefly right before I left. And so I've been out there a couple months maybe, and I get a phone call, and she's in Chicago now, and I'm out in the middle of nowhere. And she said, I'm pregnant, but I'm going to take care of it. And I started begging and pleading with her. See, I already knew how I felt. I hadn't connected a lot of dots yet, but I knew. I offered to take the kid myself, and she didn't have to have it. I said at one point, why don't we get married? And she said, well, I don't want to marry you. And I thought, when I look at it now and who I was then, yeah, I wasn't a very stable guy. I mean, so I get that. And the last thing I said, you know what, I'll get in the car right now, and I'll be there in the morning. Just don't do anything until I get there and we can talk. And she said, don't bother. My appointment's first thing in the morning. Excuse me. By the time you get here, it'll be over. The last thing I said to her on the phone was, please, whatever you do, don't kill my baby. She said, it's not a baby and it's not your decision. And she hung up the phone. So by the time an average person my age would have either graduated college or finished their first contract in the military or an apprenticeship or whatever, I had lived in 4 states, 7 cities, experienced 2 abortions, and flunked out of college. Now, some of that's related to father wounds and childhood issues, and that's a conversation for a later session. But my point with all that is, that was 1992. I didn't know anywhere to go for help. I didn't know anybody to talk to. What I saw in Christians, or people that called themselves Christians, was a lot of hate and a lot of judgment. When I was 18 at the abortion clinic, I was sitting outside on the steps, and there were poster board in the parking lot, in this little grass area by the parking lot. And they said stuff like baby killer, burn in hell, stuff like that. It drove me further and further away, and it would have never occurred to me to go to a church for help. I secretly wanted a relationship with Jesus, but I convinced myself that there was no way that was going to happen. What I had done was just too egregious, right? So fast forward, I'm 39 at this point, not now, obviously, but at that point. And somebody had given me a book, and I read it. And the long story short, I did a book study with a group of men about this book, and I was compelled to share my story at this point, and I did. And to my surprise, and I was scared to death. I was shaking, and my hands were sweating, and I'm like, I can't tell these guys this. They were all guys I went to church with, right? I mean, none of them talk about abortion, but I did. And 3 other guys came up to me afterwards out of a group of 13 or 14 men and said, hey, man, look, I've got the same story. And that was the moment I got into recovery. And even back then, there weren't a lot of options for men. I remember after 4 or 5 years of reading every book I could, and I met once a week with my pastor and once a week with a therapist. And I went through all these books, but there just wasn't a lot. And after a few years, I contacted a few pregnancy centers back then that were in the area and offered to volunteer. And they said, well, we really don't have stuff for guys. That's changed, obviously, and it's changing every day. And I'm thankful for that. As I mentioned to Kevin at the beginning of the meeting, then I did a few years as a Celebrate Recovery leader and applied the 12 steps, which is ultimately what led me to writing the 12-step small group guide. But my whole experience with it is what led me to write Almost A, the Forgotten Story, which is a novel that chronicles a guy's life from 18 to about 28 after an abortion and all that he experiences. Okay. So that's how all that happened in a nutshell, and how we got here. That's why I'm here. That's why I work for Support After Abortion as a men's healing strategist, because that moment 15 years ago, when I finally shared the story with a group of men, and other men came up to me and said, "Hey, that's my story too." Unless you've carried some pain and shame like that for that long, I don't think there's any way to explain the relief and the sense of peace and honestly excitement and just knowing I wasn't alone. So that's my thing in a nutshell. That's why I'm here, and that's why I'm doing what I do. So as we enter into a time of questions here, I just want to put a bow tie on this thing. What do we need to know about men who've experienced abortion? Well, and what do men need to know? Grief response, or grief is a natural response to loss. I think men need to know it's okay to feel that pain, that sadness, that grief, that loss. Our study shows that there is an absolute immediate need for greater awareness. Y'all, I go everywhere. I've spoken at webinars in New Zealand, which, hopefully someday I'll actually get down there to talk, but um, I will talk to anybody anywhere. I don't care if there's 3 guys in the room or 3,000. It doesn't matter, because we need more awareness. And we need more resources for men, by men, more secular resources. And we need clinicians to be trained on how to deal with this. I went to see a therapist when I was 24 years old. And about the 8th session, I mentioned the abortion experiences. And his response to me, let's see if I can do it. He goes, "Yeah, that's really not a thing. Tell me more about your stepdad." So that's what we need. Now, Support After Abortion, for those of you who are unfamiliar, maybe this is your first time at one of our events. We have monthly healing provider webinars. We have webinars for clinicians. We have a provider training center on our website. We have client healing center. We have with client facing videos that walk them through recovery, the white papers, which we've been talking about, one of healing programs, of course, my books, which I mentioned, The Forgotten Story and the 12-Step Recovery Guide, Keys to Hope and Healing. We also have a video series for men and women for facilitators for Keys to Hope and Healing. And then we have other literature that's available for you and your centers. I will put my cell phone number and my email in the chat. Supportafterabortion.com is our website. I'm going to stop sharing our screen now. I went a little bit long, and I'm going to open the floor in the last little bit of time we have here for anybody that might have questions, comments, something you want to share. Hold your hand up and you can verbalize or throw it in the chat, and Ivy or one will try to catch it.
Deborah Tilden, go ahead.
I would just like to say how much I appreciate what you guys are doing with this. My husband and I were engaged to be married when we got pregnant, and little did we know back then, that was in 1980, how profoundly that decision would impact our relationship, our marriage. We did get married by the grace of God. We've now been married almost 43 years, but there were so many times nobody was talking about it. The church wasn't talking about it. So I'm grateful what you guys are doing. It is so essential to see healing in our culture of men, women, marriages, men reconciling, having forced their wife, girlfriend, or significant other into that. And I just am so grateful for you guys and all the work that you do. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Great white papers, by the way.
Thank you, Deborah. And I would encourage any of you that wants to actually read the white paper. They are available on our website, supportafterabortion.com. But thanks for sharing that, Deborah. Yeah, and what a beautiful just testimony of power that you and your husband made it through that. Janice, I think you were next.
Hi, yes, I do have a question. When you had said one of the challenges is options for types of healing that men prefer, what are those types? I know I can understand that men are not going to be like women who want to sit in a room and hold hands, cry together. So what type of healing atmosphere does a man prefer?
So great question. And every man's different. I mean, but by and large, what I've found is that men, well, it's been said women bond face to face and men shoulder to shoulder, right? When I was a Celebrate Recovery leader, there was a leadership team. There were 6 of us, 3 men and 3 women. And me and the other leader used to goof around with the third guy, and we all treated and still treat each other like brothers, but this is how men interact. He hated the idea of an open circle of chairs with nothing in the middle. So when we went to small group share time, Kenny would put the chairs around a table. Well, occasionally me and the other leader, Mark, would hide the table. And so it was just a circle of chairs. We told the women half of the leadership team that we had done that once. And Kenny, the guy we did it to occasionally, was laughing about it, right? The women were like, oh my gosh, that's horrible. How could you do that to him? That's so insensitive. That's how guys interact, right? It's a little bit different vibe. As far as options, so shoulder to shoulder, meaning don't sit a guy in 4 or 5 guys together in a tight circle where they can literally touch knee to knee and expect them to be open and vulnerable. And I think, Janice, that's why the virtual thing was such a surprise to me, but why it worked so well. Again, I feel safe and comfortable in my own space. I have PTSD from childhood abuse I suffered, and still a little bit. And I still struggle with being in a room, for example, with my back anywhere but to a wall. And I've talked to a lot of guys who experience that too, and still deal with that. Well, if I'm sitting in my spare bedroom at home or my garage or my barn or whatever, this is my space. I'm totally at peace. So does that answer your question?
It does, yes. And I have heard of that shoulder to shoulder with men. I didn't know like if it would involve more activity, like doing something together, like playing pool together, or just an activity based instead of focusing on the emotions, discussion of the emotions.
So great point. So not with a formal group, that'd be a little tough. And a therapist that I am friends with, he and I are kind of trying to figure out an experiential healing weekend kind of thing for guys where there's canoeing and archery and whatever. But I'll tell you a story about that, Janice. Me and a buddy of mine, a lifelong friend, I've literally known him my whole life. We went fishing and we were on my bass boat. Now, if you know anything about a bass boat, you have a seat up front, a seat in the back, right? You drive in the middle and then you go to. We had over the course of that day and a half fishing, some of the most deep, reflective, emotional, connecting, vulnerable conversations you could ever have with a human being. There were also large gaps of time where we didn't say a word. And I say large gaps like 40, 45 minutes. There were also large swatches of deep conversation where I'm still fishing off the front and he's still fishing off the back. And so to your point, that's right. We weren't staring at each other in the eyes going, tell me how you feel. It was doing something. Some of the best conversations I had before I got, my body got older were with guys playing one-on-one on the basketball. So yes, to your point. Veronica, you've been very patient with my ramblings. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. It's the first time I've been on this, and I appreciate the work and your commitment and your obedience to the Lord. And I think there's a lot of, for me, knowing obviously the face-to-face for women and looking in my eyes, and for men the shoulder-to-shoulder. And it just gives me a greater appreciation what you're saying, that not every man, wants a secular, not every man wants a faith-based, but find what you said was so powerful. Meet them right where they're at. And it's not always going to be Jesus, but I think it was Father who said, meet them with that love, right? It's like, well, are you saved? Let me hold it out to you, and it's just meeting men right where they're at. I know my brother relates to your story. He was a teenager. His girlfriend got pregnant. Obviously, he couldn't do anything about that. Then married, had 3 children. His wife opted for an abortion. He couldn't protect even that child in marriage. And listening to what you're saying from a man's point of view, I've had 3 in my past, and I thank the Lord for the healing, but how we meet men where they're at, and I think the opportunity to come on here month after month and just gain that knowledge and get familiar with the verbiage and whatever resources are available, I think are great that we would all use just to continue to have these daily dialogues within amongst ourselves to get familiar of how we can reach those men out there, because some don't even know that their child lost their life to abortion. So I really appreciate and I thank you for this opportunity to join in and just say thank you again.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And keep in mind, all y'all, all y'all, that's sorry. This is a collaborative energy here, right? So I want to hear from you guys. If you read any of my books, or go to any of my talks, you will see me say over and over, I'm not a clergy member. I'm not a licensed clinician. I'm a guy who has read tons of books, been to tons of hours of therapy and meetings over the course of my adult life. And what I write and say is what I think I know. And that's not some kind of feigned humility. That's the truth of how I see it. It's not self-degradation either. It's just the truth. I know this today. I may learn more tomorrow that tells me I'm a little bit off course, right? Any of you sail? If you do, when you're sailing that sometimes just a 1 or 2 degree adjustment in your sail will straighten the craft, right? Your sail starts lufting, you're losing speed. I look at recovery like that. It's constant activity, it's constant adjustment and trying to learn. And so I learn every time I talk to somebody, everywhere I go. And maybe that's kind of selfish, but I'll go do a presentation in front of 1,200 people and I'll walk out of there with a page and a half of notes because I learned something else. And so that's what I want this to be as we go over the course of the year and meet every month and we cover and explore different topics with men and how abortion impacts men. And Smiles, go ahead, brother.
Go ahead and finish, man. Go ahead and finish.
Dude, you should know after the last 59 minutes, I can go and not finish. You should jump in.
Okay, so a really interesting statistic that I caught, it wasn't mentioned, but it was on the screen, that 16% of women want a religious approach to healing, 40% of men do. And I think pastorally, and so I've got plenty of thoughts on why that might be and stuff, but I would like to hear your thoughts on that, because that's significant. I'm a Christian. I think you are, and as probably a lot of us here are, and I think that's significant that 16% of women and 40% of men want a religious approach to healing.
So, great question. And since we're up against a time wall, I'm going to have to do short, but we're going to get into this topic in a couple months and a little bit deeper. But I will say this, in my opinion, it seems to hinge on a couple of things primarily. Number one, church wounds. They were wounded by somebody at the church. And the second one is shame, toxic shame. If you see Christians hollering that you're a baby killer, you're going to burn in hell, you should get the death penalty, you're not going to go where they're at. I mean, that's just self-preservation, right? So that's my short on it. Look, we are right up against the time. I appreciate all of you being here. I appreciate the questions and comments in the chat. Unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to get to all the comments in the chat, but wanted to let you know next month in March, we will be talking about changing the way we talk about abortion, which smiles, that kind of ties into what the can you opened, right? Changing the way we talk about abortion, not making it soft and sweet and cuddly and whatever, but talking about it in such a way that inspires people to find healing and restoration, not more shame. So with that, I thank you all for being here. I put my email and my cell phone in the chat. If you want to reach out, further have a conversation, you have questions, or want to know about any of the resources I mentioned, then please, Greg at supportafterabortion.com. I would love to chat with you. Y'all, this is what I do. This is my gig. So thank you for being here. Enjoy the rest of your week. God bless.
Yeah, question. You have us all on your email, so you'll inform us of the next meeting, won't you? You'll give us an email that you're going to meet again.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
well,
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.